Okay, we're continuing with the book here, The Best of the West in Art, Music, Movies, and Books by me, Pete Rogers. This is video number 64 from this book. And right now we're sort of going through the history of scientists and inventors and persons related to that. Okay, this is Lord Kames, Henry Holmes. He's one of the geniuses of the Scottish Enlightenment in the 1700s. And he was the teacher of many of the brilliant young guys that passed through there, like, Adam Smith. And he had this theory about the cycle of civilization. It's very similar to the Giambattista Vico cycle of civilization. And it's very much related to what later on, Thomas Cole made his famous paintings, the consummation of empire, about the cycle of civilization, how it goes from being, religious and brave and bold and heroic and kind of warlike, conquers an area. And then it's initially very religious and it becomes more agricultural, and then later on more citified and has more commerce, and then it becomes soft and weak and non-religious, and then once it's weak, a neighboring country comes in that is religious and aggressive and martial-like and kicks its butt, okay? So that's the standard cycle theory of, and he was a lot more than that. He was a lawyer, a judge, a historian, an anthropologist, a sociologist, an economist. He was a sort of a polymath Renaissance type of guy. They had a surprisingly large number of geniuses in the Scottish 1700s. I've been rather kind of amazed by that as I've studied this. Okay. He said the main reason why we have a law is to compel people to respect private property. Okay, so this next guy here is Adam Smith. Adam Smith wrote the famous book, The Wealth of Nations, and he's been called the father of capitalism. But in reality, capitalism had started many hundreds of years before through the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church ran Christendom, all these different countries in Europe, and it also, by after the 1500s, ran all these colonies through the Christian missionaries all over the world. They even had Christian missionaries in other countries before then, but it had to be constantly doing business between all these different places. Rome, even though it was this big empire, never could do that because Rome was like a plunder economy, just forced taxation of people. It wasn't trade. And Rome didn't really care about improving anything. It had so many endless slaves. All right, so anyways, he came up with the idea of the invisible hand of self-interest, that everybody benefits. In capitalism, basically, if you run a restaurant and you want your restaurant to be successful, you have to provide good food, provide good service. If you do a good job, people like it, tell their friends, more people come, and you get more customers, you make more money, then you can open another restaurant. So you're rewarded for doing a good job. That's why capitalism is great. Versus the reason why communism stinks is you're punished for doing a good job. If you're in communism and you own a restaurant, the government there will give you, let's say, $50,000 for the month. Okay, well, the more money you spend from that $50,000 given to you, the less you have at the end of the month. There's no profit based on good service. So that's why you run into things like in a communist country, all these stores and restaurants will say, out for lunch, be back in 15 minutes, and then they don't come back for hours. And I have a lot of friends who lived in communist countries when they were young. And you go to the store, there's nothing on the shelf, and you say, well, maybe, and you show them some cash. They go, well, let's see if we look in the back, maybe we can find some bread. Okay, but there's all this bartering and playing games because there's very much a lack of trust and there's a shortage of goods. Okay. So other things about Adam Smith and the Wealth of Nations, that's kind of considered the Summa. Like Summa Theologica, Thomas Aquinas was the definitive work in religion. It was sort of like the Summa of economics for his time. But again, hundreds of years earlier, capitalism was invented. Okay, and he was also a moral philosopher. That's partly why, it wasn't really so-called enlightenment. It wasn't atheistic. It was very, very, very Christian. Okay, here's the great book, The Wealth of the Nations by Adam Smith. Okay, it's a big honking book. The father of modern economics is a better way to describe him. Okay, and then the other thing too, I've made the point that, the Dark Ages, that label placed upon the Middle Ages by Rousseau, Voltaire, and Diderot, the French philosophe, atheists, and Edward Gibbons, the atheist English writer, was really an unfair label because none of them did any science to call themselves the age of science and enlightenment. Those guys are just BS artists. Okay, here's another guy. This is a typical character you'll see coming out of the 1700s, intensely religious. This is John Witherspoon, and he's a preacher like a Presbyterianism, which is really like Calvinism, in Scotland in the 1700s. And he was so brilliant of a guy that Princeton, from overseas, said, we need this guy. And they hired him to be the head of Princeton University in New Jersey. And he made it like one of the best universities in the whole world. He trained all these future, big time, big shot intellectuals that really were top notch. He would have invited lectures free to the public every week. He really encouraged free speech. And of course, still, back in those days, they studied the ancient Greeks, they studied Latin and the Romans, they studied the Italian Renaissance. They had those foundations. They also would learn other things like rhetoric, how to speak effectively, and science and whatnot. He was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. That's another thing, too. At the time of the Declaration of Independence, the founding of the United States, like 1776, the USA was very much influenced by these preachers. So these Bible-thumping preachers, the classic speech would be something like Jonathan Edwards, Protestant preacher, sinners in the hand of an angry God. And like I said before, I think the Protestants are a bit of a pain in the ass, saying, do as I say or you're going to burn in hell. But on the other hand, having a whole bunch of moralistic preachers gets people to behave well and to work hard. I mean, they had a great influence on society in America. And when these universities were Christian, they were great. Okay, this guy did a lot of things to help Princeton universities. And having guys like that running the show, they're a million times better than these modern atheist, Darwinist scumbags that run the modern universities. The modern universities have become a joke, a disgrace, a freak show. Okay. And just the fact that a Calvinist preacher from Scotland could become the head of an Ivy League university, that tells you a lot about what they were looking for, okay? All right, here's another typical guy coming out of the 1700s, Joseph Priestley, devoutly religious guy. These are all major Bible thumping. He's constantly writing about Christianity, writing extensively on religious subjects, and he was like one of the greatest chemists in the whole world. He's a co-discoverer of oxygen and did a whole bunch of other big experiments. So I'm just giving you a sense of it. The guys who did the real science were these intensely religious guys. Here's another one, Joseph Black, another guy's guys. By the way, these guys are all from Scotland. So that's what I'm trying to say, that Scotland, 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 the last 5 guys in a row are all from Scotland. And I'm telling you, I've studied tons and tons of history and culture. Scotland, pound for pound, has more geniuses than any country that ever existed on the earth that I'm aware of. More geniuses, per capita than even freaking Athens, okay? The Scottish are smart. And everybody thinks of the Scots, as being sort of backward-ass guys wearing a kilt. That's the Highlanders. And, I like the Highlanders. They're tough. They're honorable. And as a matter of fact, the Scots guys are the best soldiers ever in the history of the world. And that's well known. Don't take my word for it. You can look them up in 5 seconds. Look up, Sergeant York, the greatest USA soldier in World War I. World War II, General Patton, Audie Murphy, Douglas MacArthur, our 3 best guys. They're all Scots. Scottish Americans, okay? So anyways, here's Joseph Black, another one of these genius guys. And he discovered carbon dioxide and magnesium. Okay, several other things. He was a physicist and a chemist. He did a lot of work on, thermodynamics with specific heats and latent heats and all that stuff. All right, I just want to show you another guy. This guy is a Catholic scientist in France, Lavoisier. The smartest man in all of France, the scientifically smartest man in all of France. He figured out the role of oxygen in fire. He co-discovered oxygen. He discovered hydrogen. He pioneered all kinds of fancy scientific techniques. He developed the metric system. Okay, so here's a super genius from France. He figured out the law of conservation of math. And so what do you think was his fate? The stupid atheist. And by the way, the French Revolution was like a communist revolution. Okay, it was atheism. Atheism and communism are basically the same thing. People try to pretend they're not. They're the same thing. Don't let people trick you. Okay? So what do they do? A guy like Lavoisier, they send him to the guillotine. There goes his head. Okay? What a freaking waste to do that to, these genius guys who are discovering things to advance the progress of mankind. And I'm telling you, that's what you get with atheism. With atheism, the party's always right. There is no God. There is no appeal to Christ. It's just the party's always right. And Robespierre says, you are an enemy of the people, then you're an enemy of the people. Off you go, like the Queen of Tarts and Alice in Wonderland, off with their heads. So anyways, that's what happened to Lavoisier. And that's a perfect example of what happens when you have atheism. Nothing matters. There is no meritocracy. Whatever the party says goes. If they're in a bad mood, everybody's heads off. Okay? There's no trial by jury. There's no right or wrong. There's no law. It's just the party says, we don't like you. Off with your head. Okay? And people have to understand, that's what's coming back when you accept atheism. When you say we don't need religion, that's what you're saying, that you want this type of system. So, anyways, that's it for today.